Friends, in just a few moments, we are going to begin the funeral services. If you haven't found a seat, we would encourage you to do so at this time. And as a reminder, if you have a cell phone or a pager, we would ask for you to please take a moment to turn it off. And officiating today's memorial services will be Cantor Adam Cahan from Temple Beth El in Northbrook. As we begin our service here this afternoon, the cantor will lead the family in the tradition of Kriya.
It's our tradition, as we talk about during this week, from the moment we learn of a loved one's death until the moment that we come to be able to have a memorial service together. We're in this period called Aninut, this upturned state, this place where the world doesn't quite make sense because it's never been like this before. We recognize the importance as we migrate through these milestones into these moments to officially become mourners. We do so in this moment of Kriya, this moment of rending. We, as a custom from the biblical tradition, when Jacob heard of his son's death, although not actually his death, he rended his clothes, he tore it. We have a tradition of the same, however we choose to. In our current custom, we have the Kriya ribbons we wear. And we rib it for a number of reasons. One, it marks a moment in time. But it also notes that even if we found the finest tailor in the world who could mend that cloth back together, as our emotions mend over time, that even with the finest stitch, it wouldn't look the same as it did before. It wouldn't be the same as it was before. There's an eternal change. And this torn cloth shows the outside world some of what we're feeling inside, this rending. And so we tear the Kriya ribbon, we say a bracha, a blessing as we do. As we move from this moment of upturning, we relax into, as best we can, or fall into the embracing arms of our kahal, of our community who is gathered here today, to remember, to hold, to provide space as we process it. I'm going to ask you to come to the edge there. And you'll recite with me the following words: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Dayan ha'emet. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, Judge of truth. Esa einai el harim, Esa einai el harim, me'ain yavo, yavo ezri, me'ain yavo, yavo ezri, me'ain yavo, Yavo Ezri, me'ain yavo, Yavo Ezri. Where will my help come from? Where will my help come from? My help will come from God, Maker of heaven and earth. My help will come from God, Maker of heaven and earth. Esa einai el harim, Esa einai Sa'ina el heharim, I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where will my help come from? From Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. From John Holmes. Death this year has taken men, whose kind we shall not see again. Pride and skill and friendliness, wrath and wisdom and delight are shining still, but shining less, and clouded to the common sight. Time will show them clear again. Time will give us other men, with names to write in burning gold, when they are great and we are old. But these were royal-hearted, rare. Memory keeps with loving care. Deeds they did and tales they told. But living men are hard to spare. My friends, we have come together today to mourn the death of Philip Lewis Beham, a beloved husband to Susan and father of Brian, both of blessed memory, and father to you, Gamble, and Lindy. One who welcomed Jason into the family when Gamble and Jason became husband and wife, and then later brought the gifts of Lenny and Sebastian into the world, which transformed Phil into a loving papa. And of course, we recognize the wonderful cousin and friend that is mourned today as well. That's a lot of roles to play in one life, to be all those things for all those people. But that's what I've come to learn about Philip. He was a man who lived out many roles in one lifetime, many adventures filled with so many people who he came to know and came to embrace. I want to share a personal note here for a moment. As clergy, there are many times that I have the honor of being an officiant in these tender moments, and more often than not, my connection to the mourners is through my congregation. They're my congregants, but they're not people whom I've known beforehand from my personal life, and this is quite different for me. I've had the pleasure of knowing Jason for nearly half my life now, and I've had the good fortune of knowing Gamble since Jason met all those years ago. Sadly for me, I didn't get to meet Philip myself along that stretch of time, and I'm pretty sure I would have liked his gregariousness, his presence. And I could have had that chance at Jason and Gamble's wedding, but I wasn't there. And that always felt like a real missing for me to not be there in that moment. On that 4th of July weekend in 2014, I was sitting in Jerusalem, Israel, beginning my training to become a cantor, to become clergy. I guess I was trying to catch up to Joel, who officiated your wedding there, but I had some time to go. And I was absent so that I could get the schooling, which was the very thing that enables me to be standing here today, holding space in this moment of loss. So on a personal note, not that this is about me, but it feels like a little bit of a redemption moment. The chance to be here for someone I care about in a moment of need. I don't think there's a sentence that could more sum up the overarching story of Philip Beham. He was always wanting to be there for people, to advocate, to connect, to chat, to soak up what life had to offer. And he certainly noticed a lot of what life had to offer. While much could catch his attention, he had the capacities to engage with it all. When someone has that much energy, that much vigor, the silence left by their now absence can be jarring. For those who mourn, we recognize that in their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. And so we ask that while lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, Adonai. Hear them, O God. Be with them. Mourning is the price we pay for having the courage to love others. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is far too complex and too magnificent to be memorialized in endless pain.
The gifts of spirit our loved ones gave us cannot be measured or weighed, nor can they be lost or even tarnished by time. Even in our darkest hours, we know that some of their light and their warmth will always be with us, bringing comfort and courage, and in the fullness of time, healing peace. All these beautiful souls gathered here in the room and afar through the gifts of the internet to bring honor to one who has touched them all through his vibrant, vibrant life. I have little to no doubt that Phil would really have liked to have worked this room, to have talked with everyone. But also, as far as I've been told, for the safety of the world, someone else would have had to drive him here. I believe I heard he earned the moniker Toonces, explaining that he was as good a driver as the SNL character Toonces the Driving Cat, owner and operator of the Phil Beham School of Fine Driving. Sounds like that he may have wanted to make that an LLC, a limited liability corporation or company. Even though he not be here physically, we have the honor of lifting Philip up in our minds, in our hearts, to recognize a man who lived a full life with all the twists and turns therein, and then some. We will hear from his family, and we will also look to be buoyed by the comforts and wisdom of our Jewish traditions. We find that comfort as we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures, which bring us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. I invite you to join with me in the words of the 23rd Psalm, a psalm that extols the goodness that we can recognize in our lives, even in the shadows that sometimes cast upon our fields, goodness and mercy as our pursuers. You can find the English of the 23rd Psalm on the inside of the prayer booklet, of the service booklet that you received. I invite you to join together with me in the English of the Shepherd's Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You who heal the brokenhearted and bind up their wounds, grant comfort and consolation to these mourners as they face their grief. Fill their lives with acts of loving kindness and truth, which serve as the genuine memorial to our dear Philip. The deep bond of love will remain unbroken. And let us say, Amen. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. As an ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. Yet, the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job, we say, Adonai natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lakach, God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love, as we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. Blessed be the name of God, now and forever. I want to invite you to take the next few moments for our own moments of personal reflection as we visit with our memories of Philip, our memories of love and our connections with those in our lives, and Philip's impact upon our own life. הרופא לשבורי לב ומכבש לעצבותם מונה מספר לכוכבים לכולם שמות יקרא Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Healer of the brokenhearted, binder of our wounds, counter of uncountable stars. You know who we are. Hallelujah, Hallelujah, It's hard to sing of oneness when our world is not complete, when those who have once brought wholeness to our life have gone, and naught but memory can fill the emptiness their passing leaves behind. But memory can tell us only what we were in company with those we loved. It cannot help us find what each of us alone must now become. But memory can tell us, yet no one is really alone. Those who live no more echo still within our thoughts and words, and what they did is part of what we have become. We do best homage to our dead when we live our lives most fully, even in the shadow of our loss. For each of our lives is worth the life of the whole world, and each one is the breath of the ultimate one. In affirming the one, we affirm the worth of each one whose life, now ended, brought us closer to the source of life. In God's unity, no one is alone, and every life finds purpose. The recollections of a life magnificently lived are absolutely best conveyed through those who were formed by that life's work. It's my honor today to invite Philip's family to share their memories and love for their beloved friend, cousin, father. First, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Adam and from David, from Adam Eldon and David Krogan, and then the opportunity to hear from Lindy and Gamble. Adam, I invite you up to be with us first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I just wanted to share an important memory that Philip, when I was first born, there were some complications, and Philip helped round up an army of lawyers to help save my legs and improve my quality of life vastly. And because of that, I've been able to, do really incredible stuff, like hike mountains and, like walk all over Israel and stuff, So, still grateful for that to this day. Thanks.
David? Yeah, sorry, I didn't say it more loudly, David. It has been rare that I've been accused of not being loud enough, but I'll accept it in this moment. Yeah. Right. No problem. Thank you for being willing to share.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm David Kogan, Philip's cousin and longtime, forever friend. I grew up in this neighborhood around Belmont and Pine Grove, Belmont and Broadway, and Philip lived about a half a block away. And I've been involved in every part of my life with Philip some way or another. And I've been trying to figure out, how am I going to tell you what it was like to know Phil, to experience Phil? And I just couldn't figure out how to really condense into 5 minutes what you would really need a major motion picture to convey. Because this Philip, he was larger than life in so many ways. And when I was thinking about him, all of a sudden I just thought, well, the only way to do this, I'm thinking of words to describe him. And those words gave me memories of stories, a few of which I'll tell you. First of all, I thought of the neighborhood that I grew up in was just an amazing cast of characters, with Philip being the ringleader, of course. His cousin Laura and Adam, his son, my cousin Marlene over there, and my Lisa Swerdlov's father, Nathan Swerdlov. He was an attorney. He kept Philip out of all kinds of trouble. But he also got into all kinds of trouble with Philip. So when I think of Philip, I think of the city of Chicago. For some reason, he seemed to be part of the city. He was into every facet of this city from the age of probably 10, where Philip and I, he used to, the allure of adventure with Philip as being young, or even when you're an adult, was overwhelming. You just couldn't avoid it. And I got into plenty of adventures with Philip, and we used to go down while we were supposed to be in Hebrew school, he would take me on the bus downtown, and we'd go looking for Garrett's caramel corn and stuff like that. Now, there were no cell phones, so of course, you'd get home at about 6 or 7 o'clock, and it's like, where were you? Oh, Philip made me do it. Well, my parents got tired of hearing that phrase, because there was just unlimited adventures with him. Always something, always something. The next thought was, I don't know why, Riverview came into my mind. My cousin Marlene is shaking her head, because he'd get us to Riverview somehow. He'd always have, he's 10, 11, 12 years old. He always had the money to get us in. to do some rides. But that time he took Marlene and his first cousin Vivian, Laura's sister, and who else was there? What? Oh yeah, Pam Samet. Well, of course they got on the bus and they had a great time and they went on all the rides and of course they were supposed to save money for the ride home on the bus, but guess what? Of course not. They spent it all. So what does Philip do? He enlists his first cousin Vivian to go into a bar and beg. She was about 8 years old. He goes into he entices her to go into the bar and get bus fare. I guess it worked because they got home. But what happened when you got home? Wasn't his mother mad at the? Oh, right.
Standing on the corner of Belmont and Broadway, and Ellen jumped out of a cab screaming, "Philip, you son of a..."
Common occurrence, trust me. Common occurrence. I mean, Philip was outrageous, fearless, wasn't afraid to really do anything. I mean, no matter what it was. I'm thinking of the Rainbow Bowling Alley on Diversey and Pulaski in Chicago. How does a 12-year-old guy, he knows the owner of the bowling alley. So, of course, every Saturday we used to go bowling for a while. Unlimited bowling, maybe for, I don't know if he paid for it or not, I don't remember. But he always seemed to have another $10 in his pocket. Where it came from, I don't know to this day, but it just always seemed to have a little bit in reserve, except for that time at Riverview, obviously. He was uncontrollable, really. Those of you who know him, he really was, nobody could control him. He was going to do what he wanted to do. He actually locked Marlene in a trunk one time. He was just, there was no way you could rein him in. In fact, at some point, his mother, we could talk about her for about an hour and a half, his mother, he had to be sent to military school. I don't remember how long he stayed there, but it was a time. He was brash. I mean, he was just, he just was not afraid to live and to try things and to meet people. Nothing scared him off. He was loyal. If he was your friend, he was going to fight for you one way or the other, like he did for Adam. I mean, if he thought you needed something, he'd help you. He'd get that help one way or another. Like I say, he just knew everybody. He was an amazing person. Restaurants, that came to my mind. I mean, there wasn't a restaurant in the city, I think, that he didn't go to. Everybody knew him. Food, he loved food. I have down here food. From the beginning to the end, from a kid to an adult. It was always all about food. And pizza. In fact, how many people do you know at 17 years old opened up his own pizza restaurant called the Arena Pizzeria? It was on Wells Street in Old Town. How did he manage? He managed to steal the cook away from Douay's Pizza. And that place went on for a while. And if you knew him then, and maybe Bo Caprell had it in his letter about Arena Pizza, was like a focal point for all kinds of activities. I mean, the parties, it's Philip. I mean, it just, all things are possible. So he owns a pizza restaurant. Then think of Beham Design. He started a design firm with Ken Nemi, who was a great designer. Philip, a great salesman. They had clients like you wouldn't believe. Sears, big clients. They did They were doing fantastic. And across the hall from Beham Nimi Design Studio was a place called Promotional Arts Studio. Philip got me my first job in photography over there at 100 East Ohio. All I had to do was show up. Maybe I didn't have the courage to go in there and ask for it, but he sure did. He got me the job. And that's a place, it changed my life. It affected my life, and it gave me lifelong friends. I'm still friends with some people that know about Promotional Arts Studio. Hebrew school. I went to Hebrew school with Phil at Temple Sholem. And of course, we would take a bus home sometimes. He always convinced me we weren't going to pay on the bus. A couple of people would go on the front door, we'd get on the back door. And usually it worked. The bus drivers didn't care. We were only going 4 blocks. But one time the bus driver got mad at Phil because he was probably mouthing off to him or something like that. He let us all off. He made him ride all the way downtown. He wouldn't let him off the bus. He wouldn't let him off the bus. And, about the bus, I have a statement, a feeling about Philip. It concerns buses because it kind of sums him up. When he was in high school, especially the later years in high school, when he got on the bus, he was under 13 years old, so he could get on for half price. But when he went out that night, if he wanted to go to a bar or something like that, he was over 21. Whatever he needed to be, that's what he was. Astor Towers. If you know of Astor Towers downtown, somehow he bought Astor Towers. I don't know how. He got involved with the heir to the Schlitz fortune, the Schlitz Brewery. And they bought the Astor Towers. And he had his mother and my Aunt Clara. You've heard of my Aunt Clara. Where's the beef? In fact, she was the waitress at the Arena Pizza was Laura, and the cashier was Clara Peller, who was, where's the beef? Anyway, his mother and Clara were living on the top floor, and the rest of the place, I don't know, of course, I'm not sure they ever made any money or profit on that, but he had, you name it, they were over there for parties. There was John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd. He was friends with all those people. There was just he was just that kind of person. The restaurant Wing Yi on Clark Street, south of Diversity, comes to my mind because when I first started going out with my wife of 54 years tomorrow, we were walking down Clark Street, and out from this restaurant comes walking Phil Beham. And I look at Esther and say, you're in for a surprise. You're going to meet my cousin Phil. There's nobody like him. And the first words out of his mouth were, I just bought this restaurant. Don't tell anybody. Okay. Vendors at Wrigley Field and Comiskey Park. This was a turn of the tables. I actually knew somebody who was in business of selling souvenirs outside the ballpark. He was my next door neighbor, and I was working with him. That's another story. I could go on for an hour with this guy, but I got Philip a job as a vendor. He worked inside and outside, but mostly outside. I remember him. I mean, he just the way he dealt with people. He would yell out. Everybody is yelling out what kind of souvenirs that they were selling. Philip was yelling out, "Breck from New York," because Philip was fluent in Yiddish because he grew up with his grandmother who only spoke Yiddish. But we had so much fun selling those souvenirs. And then, of course, being the entrepreneur that he was, we were selling souvenirs outside of Wrigley Field for the Bears games. But we decided there was much more profit to be made in scalping tickets. So we would go down there and, buy tickets, sell tickets. Until one day when, of course, we tried to sell some tickets to the police. That didn't work out so well. They kind of arrested us. They put us in the back of a car and they drove us around for a while. And they drove us to the other side of Wrigley Field, took all our tickets out and said, okay, no more of that, right? Right. Yeah, right. Not, I'm sure Phil went right back to the way we were. But also, as we're talking about the reversal of roles and that he got me my first job in photography, he also introduced me to Keith and Bernie over there from Architects. And that was a relationship that continues to this day, which changed my life. Without Phil, I never would know them. They were, my main client for 35 to 40 years. And without Phil, I would not know them. So, he had an outsized influence. And I just don't think you're going to find anybody like him. It again reminds me of something that Ed Norton said about Ralph Crandon when he thought he died. He said, they're probably tearing down the pearly gates for him right now. So that's it. Oh, and did I mention trouble, trouble, trouble?
Thank you so much, David. So much that you shared that I love, not the least of which was to see not just the story's content, but the way it's transmit around the room. Those stories are held not just by one, but by the whole family, by the whole community. It's the currency of trade of a big life, of a wonderful life. Thank you for sharing that with us. Lindy and Gamble, may I invite you up, please, to share?
Good afternoon. I want to start off by thanking everyone for being here this afternoon and tuning in via live stream. My dad would never understand what a live stream was, but he'd really enjoy your presence nonetheless. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Philip's youngest, Lindy. My dad was a presence, a loyal friend, a fierce supporter, and a very proud man. I've learned many things from my dad over the years, especially as our roles changed and I started taking care of him. He'd always say, "Who was the one changing your diapers?" And much to his chagrin, I'd say, "Mom," which was not the answer he was hoping for. He loved our mom so much, and as much as it pains me that my dad isn't here anymore, I find relief knowing they're somewhere together. Cantor Cahan asked us the other day about our parents' marriage. I was a teenager when my mom died. Most teenagers aren't analyzing their parents' relationship. They loved each other deeply. My mom was his rock. She was the handyman in the house. She was the chef. She put in his contact lenses every day before work. They balanced each other out. My dad's inclination for the large and the lavish, while my mom was happy kicking back with a Diet Coke and NASCAR. But as I thought about my parents and their relationship, I thought about a key lesson I learned from them. When our dog Pumpkin died, my mom was wrecked. She swore off ever getting another dog. 2 months later, my parents and I were at the pet store. My dad really wanted a boxer. It was his dream dog. He kept picking up the 40-pound puppies, and my mom would shake her head and absolutely not. As we were about to leave, my mom saw a little tiny dog hiding in the back of one of the cages. She points at him and goes, "That." So we came home with that. We toyed around with many names, and my mom decided the only fitting name was Boxer. And that's how I learned about compromise in relationships. People have always told me I'm the spitting image of my mother and how much I remind them of her. And I loved hearing it, and I eat it up. As I grew older, I learned all the ways I'm like my dad. We share a taste for the finer things in life. We're both endlessly stubborn. We hate asking for help. I, like my father, can talk to anybody. We both loved a good guilt trip. We shared our strong negotiating skills. And we share the exact same interests in television, as I grew up watching JAG, NCIS, and Law & Order with my parents. And finally, something I learned recently, we share the same toes. He would tell me how much he loved coming home after work, and I'd run to the door screaming, "Daddy's home." He'd always remind me of all the times I'd sing, "Boom, boom, boom, I want you in my room," and how it would terrify him for my future. After a particularly rough night freshman year of college, where I may have overindulged, I was talking to my mom on the phone in the cafeteria. He grabbed the phone, said, "The word of the week is sober," and hung up on me. He'd always tell people how much I wanted to be an FBI agent, but was a nanny instead. I remember our city dates. He would have to run his errands, and we'd end the day at Vong's Thai Kitchen. My dad was a walking encyclopedia of information on the city of Chicago. He loved the history of the city and could tell you where you were by knowing the intersection and a fun fact about the corner you were at. Phil wore many hats in his life and had to grow up at a very young age. He was a charmer, making all the CNAs bring him Hershey almond bars or sneaking him Dunkin' Donuts in the morning. In the last few years, as his vision faded, he was wearing Mardi Gras beads. He would have absolutely no idea what they were, but he'd show Gamble and I with pride his special beads that somebody gave him. I loved my dad. I'd often take him to his doctor's appointments. He'd ask me about Gamble. Is she married? Yes. Is he nice? Yes, of course he is. Does she have kids? Yes, a girl and a boy. I'd show him some pictures. Then it would get to me. If you know my dad, he was never single, always married. And he'd go, "Oh, Linda, Deborah, where do you live?" And I live in Chicago. I'd give him my address. He'd tell me it was right by Astor Tower. Do you rent or do you buy? Oh, well, Dad, I rent. Well, you should really buy. It's a better return on investment. What do you do for work? I'm a nurse. Oh, wow, an RN. And he would tell everybody. His eyes would light up. And then I would get to the good stuff. Are you married? No. Do you like men? Yes. What about women? No. The girls at the office would giggle, and then we'd have the same conversation a couple times over. So if any of you here tuning in at home happen to know a tall, single man with good health insurance, please send him my way. You would make Phil a very happy man. Thank you all for coming and celebrating my father's life. I'll always be your little girl.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Gamble, and I'm Philip's oldest daughter. Thank you for joining us as we remember my dad.
Philip was a terrible driver. His inclination to bend the rules extended into the car.
I got it. My mom always drove, but she had one exception: mountains. Once, on the drive from Denver to Steamboat, my dad was driving. We reached the tunnel and he started to panic. Turns out he didn't like driving in mountains either. I remember my mom looking at him and saying, "You better keep going, Philip. We certainly can't sit here until Gamble turns 16. I was 10. Philip lived big. As I sat down to write this, I struggled with finding the words to capture who he was and what he meant to people. He was a party. He could turn a small gathering for homecoming pictures into a sit-down dinner. He loved to host. He never met a stranger. He had a big heart. He was a fierce supporter, and he was loyal. If someone was in trouble or needed help, he would find a way. The path was not always a straight line, but he found a way. He loved to talk and would often fill my voicemail. He is remembered most for his love of food. He loved it all: fancy restaurants or his go-to order from McDonald's. An Egg McMuffin, substitute the ham for bacon, extra crispy, and butter the English muffin on both sides. The window order people always knew it was him and would strike up a conversation over the speaker. He was really good at solving problems. He was also really good at causing problems. He was a Chicago guy, loyal to the city and proud of his roots. Nothing he loved more than to drive us around and to show us all the buildings he lived in and the property he once owned. He was a walking map, a skill I sadly didn't inherit. I usually get lost in my own neighborhood. He used to take me to the Chicago History Museum every Sunday. We had a routine, blintzes at Francis's, followed by the museum. He knew nothing about sports, but enthusiastically introduced me to the White Sox and the Bulls, a love I have proudly passed on to my children. Despite his great love for Chicago, he was proud to move to Highland Park. He loved having a big house and a yard that he had no clue how to take care of. My dad was fun. He loved us, and his later years, as his memory faded, he would continue to tell us how proud he was of us. His love for my mom was genuine. It's this love of family that he'll be most remembered for. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Friends, it's pretty cliche for rabbis and cantors to try and tie everything into our Torah, into our tradition, to our sacred text, but we do so often because of the wisdom it provides, not about thousands of years ago, but about today, this very moment where we find ourselves. And as we look at a new section of Torah each week, we hope to gain some insight, some helpful insight into what we're navigating in our current lives. And so last week, when Philip's physical days on earth came to a close, we were reading a portion called Yitro, which famously tells us the story of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments, like the most famous laws ever given, right? At least according to our Abrahamic traditions. So we get these rules, these famous laws last week, and this week, more laws, but what brought me to some delight as I reflected on the Torah portion and on Philip was the name of this portion this week, which is Mishpatim. That Hebrew word can be interpreted several ways. One word does mean laws. The other one is related to the word shofet, meaning judge or judgments. But it also, in modern Hebrew, is the Hebrew word for sentences. Not just like sentences that a judge would hand out, but like a collection of words, a whole bunch of words strung together. Sentences. Like if you just received a whole bunch of rules recently to follow, expectations, and for some reason you didn't follow those rules exactly, you might be connected or concerned about facing the judgment of others in your life, and you might start saying a whole lot of sentences to explain why that was so, why the difficulties of your life could help explain your actions. Regardless, clearly Phil really liked sentences. He loved to talk, as he said. He loved to get to know people. Philip Louis Beham was born in 1945, named Philip for his dad's father and given the middle name Louis for his mother's father. That was where the unity of his parents was expressed and where it also completed as his parents separated soon after his birth. Phil grew up in that Orthodox home, Jewish household, as I was told, with his mother and grandmother. It sounds like, when I say household, but apparently more like a studio apartment there. His beloved extended family living in the same building or across the street, his mom's nieces, his cousins being like his own siblings, Laura and Vivian. I've heard of the deep connection you and Philip had and how instrumental you have been throughout the years, even in these last months leading up to today, and really to the whole family. As I heard, the elders spoke Russian from the old country, but to Philip, as you said, David, they spoke Yiddish, a language that he lovingly carried into his grown-up years, closing business deals as an adult in the Yiddish of his childhood home. I heard he started working at 8 years old, so maybe that's where some of that cash came from, that sweet cash that gave him the adventures, using that same old country grit to begin earning and helping his family. So I've just been able to share with you, in my words, the beginnings of a life, but it's almost like I've told you the origin story of a half dozen different people. I could say that this was the boy who went on to meet his friends who called themselves the Three Musketeers in high school. Or I could tell you that this was the boy that went on to become a gold prospector in Mexico, complete with a donkey to ride. I could tell you of a boy who would go on to own a hotel or who owned that arena pizza. He had a medical supply business or worked in mortgages, or I could tell you of the husband of Susan or the husband of Susan or the man who dated a woman named Sue. Was I incorrect on that? And Cheryl too, yeah, but it didn't work into the series of Susans there as much in the recitation there, and I didn't want to belabor the point too much there. Yeah. All these different lives, no disrespect to Cheryl. All these different lives, way more than could be fit into the average person's or really three people's lifetimes. And yet all of them lived by the same man, a man who clearly lived life so very fully. The advantage of noting all that variety, all those first-person stories, is that it actually helps to actually outline what was consistent in all those tales. Here was a man fiercely committed to supporting the people in his life, as was noted, and making sure they had what they needed. As an advocate, as you noted, Adam, in the hospital or for many of the friends and family in their own struggles in life. Many people talk about how Philip helped them get back on the road, whether it be a road to recovery or stability in their life elsewise. So many people would say, he saved my life. When you have walked a road that is laid with potholes, you know how to move around them and get to smooth pavement. Phil was a great guide in that way. He was just fiercely there for you. Philip stood for his children as best as he knew how. He wanted to make sure that Brian, Gamble, and Lindy had what they needed. He may not have had the same opportunities and accoutrements in his own childhood, but he wanted to make sure his kids had them. He was your fiercest advocate. He wanted you to be able to do things always, and he made sure you got to do activities, and he always found the way. Being driven can be an amazing trait. The thing about all these storylines is that they can have happy endings, and unfortunately, at times, some rather unkind endings to those particular stories as well. As you said so beautifully, Gamble and Lindy, your mom had been a rock for your dad, being the anchor for his sail. You noted how she would do the handiwork around the house. And she would change the light bulbs, and she was the one watching football and NASCAR. He wasn't, as you said, so much a sports guy, despite that love for Chicago. You noted his love for history, and I love hearing the stories of the tradition you'd have of going down, going to the museum, getting the blintzes, just those times together, those times that we cherish tremendously. Phil was vibrant, but clearly Susan brought her own vibrance, solidity, and balance as Philip's partner. And when Susan died in 2010, so much was lost for Philip. He was just devastated at the end of that first-person storyline in his life, as he knew it at that moment. Brian and Philip also shared a powerful love as father and son, even when it could be mixed with the complexities of relating to someone so much like yourself. Brian's death in 2018 brought another of those terrible endings, another crater in the road of Philip's life. I read a poem recently that came to mind as I thought of Philip. We will receive each of us to our own capacity along this journey of secret destinations, instruments of the working out of all things partial becoming whole, schooled by nothing loftier than the poetry of our own lives, our hearts unlocked because God entered through our pain. God entered through our pain, the last place we expected. Even in the face of these losses, if in the face of what could tie down someone's spirit for the rest of their days, Philip still found the joys. Pain entered, and yet rather than hardening his heart, he cultivated its soil through sharing himself with others, being there for others, getting to know others, really in getting to know all other people. He was, as you said, the schmoozer of all schmoozers, the salesman of all salesmen. In restaurants, be it pizza or otherwise, they talk about the back of the house manager who runs the staff and the front of the house managers who press the flesh, talk up the clientele who just enjoy the people. Philip was the quintessential front of the house kind of guy. He had a big heart and was just very generous with his time and his space. He was just Big Phil, as he was known. He was smart intuitively. He said, long before there was ever a Google Assistant, Alexa, or Siri, there was Philip. He would have been the data set they would have used. They would have just had to plug him in. Probably could have powered the whole place too, it sounds like. He was just one of a kind. Gamble and Lindy shared with me the story of the calls they would get from the care facility. There was an issue in that Phil would just walk into people's rooms and start talking with them. He would sit on their bed and just hold conversations. Yes, the effects of dementia stole so much of the persona that was Phil, clouded so many of the memories that made Philip, but it couldn't hamper his nature, his desire to be with people, to be present with people. He had no boundaries, ever. And so here we are, with Philip Beham truly having no boundaries. And it allows us to experience him as we were unable to be in his living days, a boundless presence, would have loved to be present with everyone at all times. And in that way, in our hearts and in our stories, he is actually here with each of us, able to work the room and bring a smile to all our faces, all at the same time. And so for a tremendously fierce advocate, a big personality, one for whom we could say he had a life well lived, but more accurately, many lives well lived. May the memory of Philip Beham ever be for a blessing. And to this may we all say, Amen. My friends, in a moment I'll ask for you to rise for the traditional prayer for the departed, El Maleh Rachamim. We will immediately follow El Maleh with the words of the mourner's Kaddish, which you will find on the back of that same prayer booklet. I do ask you to please rise. El Maleh Rachamim, שוכן במרומים, אמצעי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. את נשמת לזה פייבל, שלח לעולמו, בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Philip Louis Beham, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. We continue with mourners Kaddish together. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam ul'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal Shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Ta'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi Shalama Rabba min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch she'ar avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Please be seated.
Friends, this concludes the services here at the chapel. The family will be coming together for a gathering at Max and Benny's Restaurant at 461 Waukegan Road in Northbrook, following the service approximately 3:30 until 7:30 p.m. This afternoon and into the evening, and everyone is welcome to join the family again at Max and Benny's. The family has also requested that any memorial contributions in Philip's memory to the Jackson Chance Foundation. That information is available in the service folder that you should have received when you came into the chapel today. And if you did not receive one when you came in, we do have those for you as you leave. And for those of you joining us online, all of that information regarding the gathering, the Shiva, as well as the memorial contributions is available on our website. At this time, I would ask everyone to please rise and stand in place as we escort the family and the cantor from the chapel.